In 1927, in a dim Berlin laboratory, a quiet German chemist named Hans Schwarzkopf altered human biology forever. I sit here surrounded by these ancient, leather-bound archives under a fading banker's lamp to tell you this dark truth. What nobody knew at the time was that this single invention would spark a global wave of psychological warfare. The world welcomed the very first bottle of commercial liquid shampoo. This seemingly innocent household item completely dismantled the natural defense mechanisms of the human body. It turned an ordinary biological function into a profitable social crime. This is not a story about cleanliness. This is a chilling investigation into corporate power, psychological manipulation, and the total colonization of your own skin. Humanity lived in a state of permanent physical torment before the 20th century. For thousands of years, washing hair was a rare and deeply agonizing ordeal. Ancient civilizations viewed hair as a spiritual extension of the soul. Yet, they lacked any safe method to clean it. The Romans used highly corrosive lye mixed with goat fat. This mixture scraped away the dirt. It also peeled away layers of living skin. People suffered from chronic chemical burns on their scalps. Open sores were incredibly common. These wounds frequently became infected with deadly bacteria. The pursuit of beauty was literal torture. Medieval Europe took this sensory nightmare to an entirely new level. Religious doctrines actively discouraged bathing. Water was feared as a carrier of the deadly plague. People believed that opening the pores allowed demons and disease to enter the body. Consequently, human hair became a thriving ecosystem for parasites. Thick crusts of dried sweat and sebum formed on every scalp. Lice burrowed deep into these greasy layers. They laid millions of microscopic eggs. The relentless itching drove people to the brink of absolute madness. They used sharp iron-scratching sticks to tear at their own flesh. Aristocrats in the 18th century found a bizarre way to mask this filth. They built towering, elaborate wooden frameworks on top of their heads. They wove their natural hair into these structures. Then, they plastered the entire creation with heavy animal fat. They dusted it with thick layers of scented wheat flour. This created the iconic white powdered wigs of royalty. However, this fat and flour mixture acted as an open invitation for pests. Families of mice routinely nested inside the hair of noblewomen. They built burrows directly against the warm human scalp. Women slept with wire cages around their heads at night. This kept the starving rodents from chewing through their ears. Think about that for a second. People carried entire colonies of vermin on their bodies just to look fashionable. The stench in royal courts was utterly suffocating. It was a thick mixture of rotting animal fat, stale sweat, and unwashed skin. Perfume was not a luxury. It was a desperate medical necessity to prevent vomiting. Even the wealthy could not escape the biological reality of neglect. Their hair became a matted, felted mass of decay. It was often impossible to untangle. Wealthy citizens simply sheared their heads bald when the parasitic infestation became terminal. They replaced their biological hair with expensive silk substitutes. The 19th century brought new industrial cities, but even worse hygienic horrors. Working-class families lived in cramped, windowless tenements. Clean water required carrying heavy iron buckets up several flights of stairs. As a result, washing hair remained a bi-monthly event at best. Popular ladies' magazines of the Victorian era strictly warned against frequent washing. Experts claimed that water would cause severe brain rot or chronic blindness. Instead, they recommended dry cleaning methods. Women vigorously rubbed their roots with highly toxic industrial chemicals. They used pure ammonia to strip away the stubborn grease. Ammonia caused the hair to become incredibly brittle. It snapped off in large clumps. The chemical fumes also scorched the delicate lining of human lungs. Many women suffered from permanent respiratory damage just to remove grease. When ammonia failed, they turned to even more volatile alternatives. They poured pure gasoline or highly flammable kerosene directly onto their skulls. And no, I'm not making that up. This was a standard beauty recommendation in mainstream publications. Women sat before their vanity mirrors and saturated their locks with explosive fuel. The consequences of this practice were horrific. A single stray spark from a nearby wax candle would instantly ignite the fuel. The woman's head would erupt into a violent ball of chemical fire. The flames consumed the hair and face within a fraction of a second. Victims could not extinguish the blaze before it melted their features. Their cotton nightgowns caught fire instantly. Hundreds of young women burned alive inside their own locked bedrooms. Their families could only watch in absolute horror as beauty routines transformed into gruesome executions. The human cost of avoiding greasy hair was measured in charcoal remains. Medical logs from the 19th century described these accidents in agonizing clinical detail. Dr. Friedrich Lorenz recorded the case of a young Berlin girl in 1894. She attempted to clean her hair using a mix of petroleum and alcohol. Her brother lit a match across the room. The air itself seemed to explode. She survived for 3 days with third-degree burns covering her entire upper body. Her hair was completely gone. Her scalp had fused with her pillow. This was the terrifying reality of personal grooming before corporate stabilization. Even when women used safer methods, the results were deeply unpleasant. They boiled large pots of water mixed with wood ash. This created a primitive liquid lye. It stripped away the grease but left the hair feeling like rough straw. The high alkalinity destroyed the outer cuticle of the hair strand. To counteract this, women rinsed their hair with highly concentrated vinegar or sour milk. The acidic rinse neutralized the lye. However, it replaced the smell of grease with the pungent odor of rotting dairy. The human head was caught in an eternal cycle of foul odors. Men faced a different set of challenges. They relied heavily on stiff pomades made from bear grease or beef tallow. They used these heavy fats to slick their hair back into fashionable styles. This grease never truly evaporated. It accumulated day after day. It absorbed the thick coal dust that choked the air of industrial London and Manchester. A man's head became a literal magnet for environmental pollution. When they rested their heads on furniture, they left dark, oily stains behind. This led to the widespread invention of antimacassars. These were small cloths placed on the backs of chairs to protect the fabric from human hair grease. The physical discomfort of this lifestyle is hard for modern minds to comprehend. The scalp is one of the most sensitive skin surfaces on the human body. It contains thousands of nerve endings and blood vessels. For centuries, these nerve endings were subjected to constant irritation. The buildup of dead skin cells created thick, yellow flakes. This condition was not seen as a cosmetic flaw. It was simply an unavoidable fact of human existence. People wore heavy hats indoors and outdoors. They did this partly to hide the unsightly state of their hair. This widespread suffering created an immense market opportunity. In the early years of the 20th century, Hans Schwarzkopf operated a small pharmacy. His shop sat on a bustling street in Berlin. He watched women struggle with harsh, solid bars of lye soap. Standard soap reacted terribly with the hard mineral water of city plumbing. It left a thick, gray, waxy residue on the hair. This film made the hair look even duller than before, felt sticky to the touch. Schwarzkopf realized that the world desperately needed a water-soluble alternative. He began experimenting with secret chemical blends in his back room. In 1903, he launched a breakthrough product. It was a violet-scented powder soap that dissolved instantly in water. It was an overnight sensation. Berlin elite flocked to his small shop. For the first time, washing hair did not require dangerous fuels or corrosive lye. Yet, the powder was still inconvenient to measure and mix. Schwarzkopf spent the next 2 decades obsessively searching for a stable liquid formula. He faced endless laboratory failures and mounting financial debts. He sacrificed his personal health in the toxic fumes of his workshop. What nobody knew at the time was that the catalyst for his ultimate success would emerge from total war. In 1914, Europe descended into the meat grinder of the First World War. The German military machine faced an immediate and catastrophic shortage of natural fats. Every scrap of animal grease was urgently diverted to manufacture explosives. Traditional soap factories ground to a sudden halt. The civilian population grew filthy and diseased. The German chemical syndicate, IG Farben, received an urgent military order. They needed to create synthetic washing agents that required zero animal fats. Industrial chemists began manipulating petroleum derivatives in heavily guarded laboratories. They successfully synthesized a new class of chemicals called alkyl sulfates. The most prominent among them was sodium lauryl sulfate. This compound possessed an astonishing ability to cut through heavy grease. The German military used it to clean the scorched engines of tanks. It stripped away industrial motor oil and thick military grime within seconds. It was cheap to produce in massive chemical vats. It was completely immune to the minerals in hard water. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. The brilliant, underpaid scientists who formulated these industrial surfactants never received their true reward. They worked as corporate cogs within a massive military-industrial complex. They signed away their intellectual property rights for meager monthly salaries. Many died in absolute obscurity and grinding post-war poverty. Their lungs were ruined by inhaling raw chemical dust. Meanwhile, corporate executives filed away these top-secret patents. They waited for the perfect moment to unleash this industrial degreaser upon the civilian market. Hans Schwarzkopf acquired access to these new synthetic compounds after the war. In 1927, his company combined these industrial surfactants with water and stabilizing agents. They created the world's first commercial liquid shampoo. They marketed it as a luxurious elixir of modern science. The public had no idea they were pouring modified tank degreaser onto their bodies. The liquid formula created an incredibly rich, pillowy foam. This foam provided a powerful sensory illusion of deep luxury. In reality, it was a harsh chemical assault on human biology. The introduction of this product triggered an immediate corporate arms race across the Atlantic. In America, a young chemist named John Breck watched the German market with intense interest. Breck suffered from premature hair loss. He blamed his condition on the harsh local soaps. He established his own laboratory in Springfield, Massachusetts. In 1930, he introduced his own line of pH-balanced liquid shampoos. He began using beautiful, hand-drawn illustrations of women with glowing hair to sell his product. This campaign gave birth to the famous Breck Girls marketing phenomenon. Behind these beautiful images lay a dark corporate reality. The manufacturing process of these liquid shampoos was hazardous and highly exploitative. Factory workers in the 1930s handled raw surfactant powders without any protective gear. They breathed in the concentrated chemical dust day after day. This led to chronic coughing, severe skin ulcerations, and early respiratory failure. The factories resembled dark satanic mills of the modern chemical age. The corporate profits swelled while the human labor force was ground to dust. The commercial liquid formula required extensive chemical stabilization to prevent separation on retail shelves. Chemists added heavy metals, formaldehyde, and artificial preservatives to the mixtures. These ingredients kept the liquid translucent and appealing for months. However, they also turned the shampoo into a toxic cocktail. Workers who blended these ingredients frequently suffered from neurological disorders. Their hands developed deep, bleeding fissures from handling the concentrated liquids. The industry-hidden history was built upon a foundation of broken human health. The corporate entities strictly suppressed any medical studies that questioned the safety of these products. Early dermatological reports suggested that synthetic surfactants caused chronic scalp inflammation. They linked the frequent use of shampoo to a rise in premature baldness among men. These studies were quietly bought out and buried by corporate lawyers. The public was kept in a state of absolute ignorance. They believed they were participating in a glorious hygienic revolution. They were actually participating in a massive, uncontrolled biological experiment. The introduction of liquid shampoo marked the beginning of an aggressive corporate takeover. Before this moment, people washed their hair out of a basic need for hygiene. They did it to remove parasites and heavy soot. Corporate executives realized that simple hygiene was a terrible business model. If people only washed their hair once a month, sales would remain low. The market would quickly stagnate. The corporate elite needed to fundamentally alter human behavior. They needed to manufacture a psychological crisis that only their product could solve. Cosmopolitan cosmetic companies launched a massive, coordinated propaganda campaign. They weaponized the psychological concepts of social shame and sexual rejection. Full-page print advertisements began appearing in millions of households. These ads targeted the deepest insecurities of young women. They featured illustrations of beautiful women sitting completely alone at social dances. The text explicitly blamed their isolation on a newly invented medical condition. They called it offensive hair odor or microscopic grease accumulation. They turned a natural biological state into a terrifying social disease. I must pause my reading of these corporate ledgers to address you directly from this desk. Look around at this mountain of historical evidence. The executives knew exactly what they were doing to your mind. They created a perpetual motion machine of human insecurity. If you appreciate this deep dive into the hidden machinery of capitalism, take a brief moment to subscribe to this channel right now. We must uncover these dark truths together. Let us return to the year 1950. The trap was about to spring shut on a global scale. The marketing trap was brilliant because it relied on a biological loop. Sodium lauryl sulfate is an incredibly aggressive surfactant. It does not merely remove surface dirt, completely strips away the sebum. Sebum is the natural lipid barrier produced by your sebaceous glands. This oil exists to protect your scalp from bacteria and dehydration. When shampoo completely obliterates this layer, the human body enters a state of physiological panic. The sebaceous glands receive an urgent distress signal. They begin pumping out new sebum at a frantic, unnatural speed. Think about that for a second. The product actually created the very problem it claimed to cure. The more frequently a person used synthetic shampoo, the faster their hair became greasy. Within 24 hours of washing, the scalp was drowned in an overproduction of emergency oil. The consumer woke up with limp, dirty hair. They felt a deep sense of personal shame. They immediately reached for the plastic bottle once again. The corporate empires had successfully hijacked human biology. They turned a monthly ritual into a mandatory daily dependency. The economic consequences of this engineered dependency were staggering. Shampoo sales skyrocketed by thousands of % within a single decade. The cosmetic industry transformed into a multi-billion-dollar global behemoth. But the corporate greed did not stop there. The constant chemical stripping left the hair shafts completely hollow, dry, and damaged. The hair became static and impossible to style. Instead of weakening the formula, chemical companies invented a brand new product category. They introduced synthetic hair conditioners. These lotions were formulated with silicone derivatives to artificially coat the damaged hair. This was the ultimate capitalist triumph. They sold humanity a harsh chemical to strip their hair bare. Then, they sold them a second chemical to replace the natural oils they just destroyed. It was a flawless double extraction of wealth. This synthetic lifestyle altered global trade routes and modern manufacturing. Giant chemical complexes expanded across the globe to produce millions of tons of surfactants. The simple act of washing became a massive macroeconomic driver. It required global shipping networks, massive plastic factories, and relentless chemical strip mining of resources. The environmental toll of this daily ritual is an ongoing ecological catastrophe in 2026. Every single day, hundreds of millions of people lather their heads with synthetic sulfates. This toxic foam washes down the drain. It bypasses municipal water treatment facilities because it is incredibly stable. It flows directly into our rivers, lakes, and oceans. These surfactants disrupt the surface tension of natural water bodies. They poison aquatic life and destroy microscopic ecosystems. We are systematically poisoning the planetary water supply. We do this simply to maintain an artificial standard of hair dryness. In the 1970s, the corporate assault shifted its focus toward the male demographic. Historically, men used basic hair tonics or stayed out of the shampoo aisle entirely. Marketing executives realized they were missing half of the global population. They needed a new psychological weapon to pierce the male ego. They found that weapon in the universal fear of premature balding and visible dandruff. Companies like Procter & Gamble poured millions into developing Head and Shoulders. They launched aggressive television commercials featuring professional athletes. These ads suggested that a single flake of dandruff would ruin a man's career and romantic life. The chemical solution for dandruff was even more intense than standard surfactant mixtures. Chemists introduced active ingredients like zinc perithione and selenium sulfide. These are powerful antimicrobial agents designed to kill the Malassezia fungus on the scalp. However, these chemicals also acted as severe irritants to the human skin. They caused the scalp to peel and flake even more when use was discontinued. Once again, capitalism created a perfect lock-in mechanism. A consumer who tried to stop using anti-dandruff shampoo experienced an immediate, violent resurgence of flaking skin. They were trapped in a lifetime subscription to a toxic product. The visual landscape of the modern world was reshaped by this commercial triumph. Suburban homes built in the late 20th century featured entirely new architectural designs. Bathroom medicine cabinets expanded to hold dozens of plastic bottles. Showers were built with dedicated shelves and niches specifically designed to store various hair care products. The average human bathroom transformed into a retail display for chemical conglomerates. This domestic space was no longer just a place for basic cleaning. It was a temple dedicated to the maintenance of an engineered chemical dependency. The marketing departments soon realized that consumers were becoming numb to basic cleanliness promises. They needed to invent new subcategories to keep profit margins climbing. They introduced the concept of hair typing in the late 1990s. Advertising campaigns convinced people that their hair was uniquely dry, oily, curly, or fine. Each specific hair type required a specialized, premium-priced formula. In reality, the base ingredients across these products remained virtually identical. The consumer was paying a massive premium for different artificial fragrances and colorful plastic packaging. It was a masterclass in superficial differentiation. By the early 2000s, the industry co-opted the emerging organic and natural health movements. Consumers began reading ingredient labels and expressing concern over synthetic sulfates. The corporate response was swift and deeply cynical. They launched lines of sulfate-free shampoos that replaced sodium lauryl sulfate with slightly modified chemical cousins. These alternatives, like sodium cocoyl isethionate, were marketed as gentle and plant-derived. However, the environmental impact of manufacturing these alternatives remained incredibly high. They still required extensive industrial processing and generated massive chemical byproducts. It was greenwashing on a global macroeconomic scale. The modern supply chain of hair care products is deeply intertwined with global environmental destruction. One of the primary sources for natural fatty acids used in modern green shampoos is palm oil. The explosive demand for sustainable hair care led to the clearing of millions of acres of pristine tropical rainforests in Indonesia and Malaysia. Indigenous communities were violently displaced from their ancestral lands to make way for corporate palm plantations. Rare species like the orangutan were pushed to the absolute brink of extinction. The consumer who washes their hair with a natural shampoo in 2026 is unknowingly participating in the destruction of the global biosphere. Think about that for a second. The desire for clean hair has literal geopolitical and ecological consequences. The plastic bottles that contain these elixirs represent another layer of systemic violence. Over 90% of shampoo bottles are never recycled. They end up in massive landfills or float in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. They take hundreds of years to break down into toxic microplastics. These microplastics find their way into the global food chain. They are ingested by fish, animals, and ultimately by humans. The chemical loop that began on the human scalp ends inside our own internal organs. The global trade of these products is monitored by a tiny cartel of multinational corporations. Companies like Unilever, L'Oreal, and Johnson & Johnson control hundreds of smaller brands. They maintain a functional monopoly over the global personal care market. They possess enough political lobbying power to dictate environmental regulations and safety standards. They ensure that synthetic chemicals remain cheap to manufacture and easy to dump into public water systems. The modern regulatory state is entirely complicit in maintaining this chemical loop. The psychological toll of this system continues to manifest in severe body dysmorphia. Modern social media algorithms amplify the pressure to maintain impossibly perfect hair. Influencers showcase thick, voluminous, hyperglossy locks that are heavily filtered and digitally altered. The viewer compares their natural, chemically stripped hair to these artificial ideals. This creates a permanent state of psychological inadequacy. The consumer blames their own genetics instead of blaming the corporate products they use. They spend more money on advanced hair serums, masks, and professional salon treatments. The entire modern hair care apparatus operates as a self-fulfilling prophecy of degradation. The synthetic products weaken the structural integrity of the hair follicle over time. The hair becomes thinner, more brittle, and more prone to premature graying. This degradation creates a desperate need for anti-aging hair products and specialized thickening formulas. The industry profits from the very decay it accelerates. It is a perfect closed-loop economic system that converts human insecurity into corporate equity. We must examine the specific mechanics of hair anatomy to understand the full scope of this biological colonization. A single strand of human hair is composed of a tough protein called keratin. The outermost layer is the cuticle, which resembles overlapping shingles on a roof. In a natural, healthy state, this cuticle is kept flat and smooth by the presence of natural sebum. This smooth surface reflects light perfectly, giving hair its natural, healthy sheen. When a consumer applies a modern sulfate shampoo, the high surfactant concentration forces the cuticle shingles to lift and swell. This allows the water to wash away the natural lipids locked underneath. Once the cuticle is lifted and stripped, the internal cortex of the hair strand is exposed to environmental hazards. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun bakes the exposed protein, causing it to oxidize and fracture. Atmospheric pollution and microscopic soot particles settle into the open gaps of the hair shaft. This makes the hair appear dull, lifeless, and rough to the touch. The hair strands rub against each other, creating friction that leads to severe tangling and split ends. The biological structure is fundamentally broken by a single wash cycle. To fix this structural ruin, the consumer is forced to purchase the second step of the corporate ritual. Hair conditioners function by using positively charged quaternary ammonium compounds. These synthetic molecules are attracted to the negatively charged damaged areas of the chemically stripped hair shaft. They bind to the open cuticle, laying down a thin, artificial plastic coating over the fracture lines. This coating mimics the smooth texture of natural sebum, creates a temporary illusion of health and softness that lasts until the next wash. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. The artificial silicone coating left behind by conditioners is completely insoluble in water. It builds up on the hair strand with each subsequent application, creating a heavy, suffocating layer. This buildup weighs the hair down, making it look flat, greasy, and completely devoid of natural volume. The consumer notices this heaviness and concludes that their hair is dirty once again. They reach for the harsh sulfate shampoo to strip away the silicone buildup. This begins the vicious cycle anew. The entire routine is a chemical tug-of-war played out on the human skull. This cycle has profound effects on the microbial ecology of the human scalp. The human skin is home to trillions of beneficial bacteria and fungi that form a protective microbiome. This microbiome thrives in the slightly acidic environment created by natural sebum and sweat. Modern shampoos possess a highly alkaline or artificially altered pH level that completely disrupts this delicate ecosystem. The beneficial bacteria are wiped out alongside the dirt. This leaves the scalp defenseless against opportunistic pathogens. The eradication of the natural microbiome allows harmful fungal species to proliferate unchecked. This overgrowth triggers a chronic inflammatory response from the host immune system. The body attempts to shed the infected skin cells at an accelerated rate, resulting in severe dandruff and itching. The consumer interprets this inflammation as a sign of poor personal hygiene. They respond by washing their hair even more aggressively with harsh medicated shampoos. This further decimates the microbiome, ensuring that the inflammatory condition becomes permanent and chronic. The financial reality of this dependency represents a massive, invisible tax on human existence. The average modern consumer spends thousands of dollars on hair care products over their lifetime. This capital is directly transferred from the working class to the wealthy shareholders of multinational chemical conglomerates. We work hours of our lives just to earn the money required to buy chemicals that damage our bodies. This wealth extraction is completely voluntary, driven entirely by the psychological conditioning of corporate marketing. The historical shift away from natural hair care also destroyed ancestral knowledge systems. For generations, different cultures possessed deep, localized knowledge of botanical hair care. Indigenous communities used crushed roots, fermentations, and natural clays to cleanse and protect their hair without disrupting their biology. In India, the use of shikakai and soap nuts maintained healthy hair for centuries. In West Africa, black soap made from plantain skins provided gentle cleansing. The global expansion of liquid shampoo systematically demonized these traditional practices as primitive and unsanitary. Corporate entities used aggressive trade agreements and cultural imperialism to colonize foreign markets. They flooded developing nations with cheap, single-use shampoo sachets. These small plastic packets were priced low enough to appeal to the poorest demographics. Traditional botanical alternatives were forced out of the local marketplaces. Within a single generation, ancient knowledge of natural hair care was completely erased from the collective memory. Entire populations became completely dependent on import-reliant synthetic chemicals packaged in non-recyclable plastic. The true horror of this transformation is the normalization of the unnatural. We have been so thoroughly conditioned by corporate propaganda that we view natural human hair as an inherent problem. We perceive the natural oil production of our own skin as a disgusting flaw that must be eradicated daily. We have accepted a state of permanent chemical dependency as the baseline of civilized human behavior. The modern human is unable to envision a life outside of the retail loop. Let us look closely at the modern alternative movements that attempt to break this cycle in 2026. The No-Poo movement emerged as a grassroots rebellion against corporate hair care. Millions of individuals attempted to stop using synthetic shampoos entirely. They documented their experiences on internet forums and social media platforms. They reported a brutal transitional phase lasting several weeks, during which their sebaceous glands continued to pump out emergency oil. This transitional phase is the literal detox period from corporate chemical addiction. Those who successfully survive this intense biological detox report a remarkable stabilization. Their sebaceous glands eventually realize that the chemical assault has ceased. The oil production slows down to a balanced, natural equilibrium. The hair microbiome slowly regenerates, curing chronic dandruff and scalp inflammation naturally. The hair strands regain their natural structural integrity and reflective sheen without the use of artificial silicones. This grassroots movement proves that the human body is fully capable of self-regulation when left undisturbed. However, the corporate response to this rebellion has been typically calculated and swift. Cosmetic conglomerates did not try to suppress the movement. Instead, they co-opted it. They launched new product lines called cleansing conditioners or co-washes. These products are marketed specifically to individuals looking to escape traditional shampoos. They are priced as premium artisanal items. In reality, they are simply diluted versions of the same synthetic conditioning agents. Capitalism seamlessly adapted to monetize the very resistance against its own systems. The global infrastructure supporting the shampoo industry is massive and deeply entrenched. It includes specialized petrochemical refineries, global distribution networks, and massive advertising agencies. This apparatus cannot allow humanity to realize that its products are completely unnecessary. The survival of these corporate empires depends entirely on the continuation of our collective psychological illusion. They must keep us convinced that natural biology is a disease, and that salvation can only be purchased in a plastic bottle. Think about that for a second. Every time you step into the shower, you are entering a battlefield of corporate control. The lather that fills your eyes is the physical manifestation of a century-old industrial plot. It is a system designed to extract your wealth, alter your biology, and poison the planet. We have surrendered the ownership of our own bodies to multinational boardrooms for the simple illusion of a clean scent. The true history of liquid shampoo is a cautionary tale of modern progress. It shows how easily human behavior can be manipulated when technology and capitalism align. A minor convenience introduced by a Berlin pharmacist in 1927 ballooned into a global ecological and psychological crisis. It demonstrates that the most effective form of control is one that the victim willingly applies to themselves every single day. The invisible chains of modern society are scented with artificial lavender and packaged in recyclable plastic. The regulatory oversight governing these cosmetic ingredients is shockingly toothless. In the United States, the Food and Drug Administration lacks the legal authority to approve cosmetic ingredients before they hit the market. The industry is essentially self-regulated through a corporate-funded body known as the Cosmetic Ingredient Review. This arrangement allows thousands of untested synthetic chemicals to be poured directly onto human skin every day. The long-term synergistic effects of these combinations remain entirely unknown to science. We are living as walking laboratories for corporate chemical experiments. Biomonitoring studies conducted by public health organizations routinely detect shampoo ingredients inside human tissue. Chemicals like phthalates, used to stabilize synthetic fragrances, are known endocrine disruptors that interfere with human hormones. They have been linked to declining fertility rates, developmental disorders, and metabolic diseases. Parabens, used as cheap preservatives, have been discovered inside human breast cancer tumors. The scalp acts as a highly porous gateway, absorbing these toxins directly into the bloodstream within seconds of contact. The illusion of topical cleanliness conceals a deep internal contamination. The production of synthetic fragrances represents another hidden layer of corporate secrecy. Under current trade secret laws, cosmetic companies are not required to disclose the specific chemicals used to create a scent. The single word fragrance or parfum on an ingredient label can mask a cocktail of hundreds of distinct petroleum-derived compounds. Many of these hidden chemicals are known neurotoxins and skin allergens. They trigger chronic headaches, sinus inflammation, and subtle cognitive fatigue in millions of users. The clean smell we covet is a toxic smokescreen designed to mask industrial chemical odors. The physical structure of the modern city has been engineered to handle this massive chemical output. Municipal sewage systems process billions of gallons of surfactant-laden gray water every day. The persistent foam accumulates in treatment ponds, reducing the efficiency of biological filtration systems. The chemical residues bind to heavy metals already present in urban runoff, creating highly toxic compound mixtures. These mixtures seep into local water tables, contaminating agricultural soil and public drinking wells. The consequences of our daily hygiene ritual ripple outward through every layer of civil infrastructure. We must confront the harsh reality of our collective aesthetic obsession. The modern standard of beautiful hair is entirely synthetic, unstable, and unsustainable. We have traded the resilient, self-sustaining biology of our ancestors for a fragile, corporate-dependent simulation of health. We have allowed a multi-billion-dollar industry to dictate our self-worth based on the frequency of our consumption. The struggle for body autonomy begins with the realization that our natural state is not a defect to be corrected. I slowly close this massive folio of corporate history. Hans Schwarzkopf's 1927 Berlin legacy remains completely unbroken. Human systems change through technology, but our fundamental vulnerability to manufactured shame remains identical. Subscribe if this surprised you. Click the video on your screen now to dive deeper into our secret past.